Attention Los Angeles, this June, our new play, Termination Fee, is part of the Hollywood Fringe Festival. Termination Fee is a scathing commentary on the American healthcare system. It features myself, Sarah K. Godot, and Andrew Saxena. It is being produced in partnership with Fringe Management and Black One Productions. We will be at the Black Box Theater at the Broadwater June 8th, June 16th, June 21st, June 24th, and June 29th. Tickets and all information at romplacone.com. What's up, everybody? The wait is finally over and totally over. Left at Wall is available now, right now. You can get Left at Wall on Apple TV, Google Play, YouTube Movies. You can get it on demand. You can buy it on DVD. The wait is totally over. Just type in Left at Wall on your search bar on your smart TV, and you can find a bunch of ways to get it. You can watch it now. Again, that's Left at Wall, wherever you get your movies. Episode 90, Peter Joseph. Peter Joseph is a filmmaker, author, musician, and activist. Years ago, he released the Zeitgeist documentary for free online. He went viral before there was a term for such a thing. He spawned a movement that had chapters all over the world. He's released other films and books since. I was fortunate enough to cross paths with him a few times over the years, and we've kept in touch. He's a fairly private guy, so it was cool to learn more about the man behind the work. Please welcome to the show, Peter Joseph. Peter Joseph, good to see you. It's been a while.
Absolutely, Ron. How you been?
I've been all right, man. I've been all right. So I want to start at the beginning because you are very much a man of mystery. So I would like to know, as much as you're willing to share, the origin story of Peter Joseph. Where'd you grow up? What were some of your interests? How did you find your way to the creative quilt you have now?
Well, I'll give a capsule summation. Growing up in North Carolina, I was fortunate to kind of get out of the traditional educational ecosystem. Around the 8th grade, actually, I went to an arts school college, which is a great influence on me. So for 5 years, I was able to be exposed to effectively a college environment. It matured me. It was many different nationalities. And of course, it was arts-based and that, nurtured. And again, I don't think I would have survived in traditional educational environment in the South. And from there, after pursuing percussion, which is, you might look behind me, that's still all of my stuff behind me. I still maintain it as a meditation. Obviously, I don't pursue it professionally, but it's still important to me. Keep my mental health up. I went to New York City with the pursuit of getting a percussion degree from the New School, which is a classical percussion degree. I learned in that environment, at least in the economic ecosystem, that I was going into outrageous amounts of debt. My parents didn't have any debt, so I had these extensive loans, these ridiculous interest rates. So after my second year, I was like, you know what? I've basically been in college for 7-8 years because I had started effectively college in 8th grade. It's like, I'm not going to worry about this. Not to mention I didn't really have the pursuit of wanting to be an orchestral musician. It's like a commercial job, or you can be in a pit in Broadway. It wasn't my interest. I had more of a creative interest, solo stuff and, contemporary stuff. So I dropped out, namely though, because of the economic problem. I was like, I don't want to be $100,000 in debt. Then, of course, it got deferred way down the years. I finally paid it off, but it was absolutely absurd. So that was my first lesson. So from there, I was stuck in New York City. So I dropped out of school. I lived in Brooklyn. And, scrounging around for work as a musician, I kind of gravitated towards video editing and commercial production. I got a gig in this terrible little company. I even wrote about it in my book. They're completely corrupt. I won't even go into it, but as all companies effectively are, this is just a larger extreme. And I learned a bit of video editing. I also did music composition, and then I bounced around, did contract work over the course of the next, 6 years. And I learned that skill. It kind of carried over into a musical sensibility. It's phrasing and all that stuff. So I kind of drew to it. And then I decided to ultimately make a little catharsis piece since I learned this video editing stuff. And I, of course, was pursuing music in my own private hobby. I was contracting now and doing little off-Broadway stuff and live performances and some collaborative things. It was all, again, just for my own interests, not a professional interest. I always wanted to separate that in my life. I never wanted to be a professional musician. There's something about when you're in the institution and being paid for it, it just distorts it, as irrational as that may seem to some. So I always had a secondary kind of gig life. But in that world, I jumped ahead once more. So go back to my early 20s. I did something particularly interesting. So first of all, my video editing work was in advertising. And I'm like, okay, this is what I have to deal with.
Well, can I ask a real quick side question on that before you continue? So for video editing, were you just all completely self-taught there?
Yeah, which wasn't that hard to do. I mean,
so what video editing? You want to jump into that?
What's that?
What made you just want to jump into that? And then
it was just a desperation for a job. I mean, I could be a waiter. For my first year out of college, I was a cater waiter in New York City. That was a fantastic job. You're literally a slave to the upper 1%. You wouldn't believe some of the outrageous cater waitering gigs I had with these billionaires and millionaires, these just stupid amounts of money spent on a little event, $1 million and so forth. But so video editing just came naturally. It's like, at least I'm in some kind of creative something, right? So that was that. But then I moved towards short-term equity trading. So this is my idea. This is before I had any kind of real social consciousness. I was still active in my own mind. I had my opinions on things. I didn't care for society, but I wasn't about to save the world. I had no interest in activism. So I went and I started to trade and learn to trade with professional traders. And basically Wall Street traders. I say that not on Wall Street, but many of them were from Wall Street. And over the course of a couple of years, I started to build out a trading platform, a trading strategy, and that was going to be my goal, to be able to pursue my music and then trade the markets in the morning. I had this whole thing I could go on, but I won't. And then in the midst of all of this, something just didn't sit right. I'm like, what am I doing? I've been working in advertising that does nothing, that truly is a distortion, that creates some of the sickest cultural problems that we've seen as a response to the growth economy that we have, which we can talk more about. In fact, I have a film project that it's called A World Without Advertising that I haven't materialized yet. I really want to do it next because I don't think people realize what the world could be if we didn't have this entrenchment and this disgusting overlay driven by the market system. So then there was equity trading, which, you see dollar signs, you work from home, maybe it can work out. You have to have enough money to do it. I never really had enough money to do it because you have to have like good 6 figures in your savings to have the leverage and so forth. But I was like, wait a minute, this is Wall Street. What is this? This doesn't produce anything. It doesn't create anything. It doesn't do a damn thing. It's a truly destructive force, in fact, as if you'd want to touch upon later, because Wall Street, like in the 1929 crash, people don't think about this. Why did the entire world, essentially the Western world, Russia wasn't affected, have to crash? Because Wall Street crashes, because of all these games of leverage and all that. Why? Because it's a sick system where all the commercial banks and all the general population are trained, just like they are now with their retirements and their 401k, to put everything in it as some inflationary hedge or some retirement thing. So there's this nasty web, which is getting worse today, by the way, and you can expect some pretty sharp dynamics at some point in the future, which is inevitable with these market crashes, which will affect the average person substantially. So in the midst of this cognitive spiritual crisis, we'll call it, I put together this brash performance piece called Zeitgeist in 2007. It was a shock piece. It was like, I'm going to take all this stuff that I've just been perusing around from these counter stories on religion, of course, elements of government corruption and of war and the financial system. And I'm going to I was originally going to do it as a soundtrack kind of piece, which is a live performance with 2 screens, but it turned into a documentary. And I was really proud of it for its effect. Now, people often criticize that film thinking it was intended to be this outlay documentary. Everything's sourced. Everything has its integrity in the film, but it's designed to force the person to say, what? That is the intention of that film as a work of art. And to this day, I still have to try to explain that to people. And that film that performance piece was run in downtown Manhattan for 6 nights for free. I remember chasing the Village Voice. I don't know if anyone's familiar with New York City, but they have a Village Voice I remember when I was in my mid-20s, I made little cards and I put them in every single Village Voice that I could find. That was my low-budget advertisement, like thousands of them. I just chased them at like 4 a.m. I followed the truck.
Oh, wow.
I actually got people to show up for this thing, and many of them walked out. You wouldn't believe the tourist reaction to it.
Oh, wow.
But it was funny. And then I put it on the internet on Google Video. This was before YouTube had any legs. This is like cat videos on YouTube in 2007. And it just exploded. And I didn't even promote it. I just threw it up there saying, well, here's an archive of this thing. I could have added other layers of the music that was supposed to be with it. And something just happened, and it literally hit the zeitgeist, as it were.
Yeah, and from there, you went viral before there was a word for it.
Pretty much. And it was, I remember this guy from University of California, he said he ran a thing on some kind of media studies, and they had done something with Zeitgeist, and it was at that time the most viral production ever on the internet. So whatever that's worth today, very little, because it's all bonkers. But for the time, that was fascinating. And now at that moment, I realized this is a strange opportunity. This is completely unexpected. And of course, my activist side did come forward. And I realized I had an audience now. Like, okay, I got to do something actually constructive with this. I'm not going to sit there and make a bunch of shock pieces anymore. So when Zeitgeist Addendum came out the next year, that was focused explicitly on economics, which I had grown to very much learn more about. In fact, when I did my stock trading stuff, that's where I got into it. That's where I started to learn about macro and microeconomics. And then Zeitgeist Moving Forward, the third, came out in 2011. That was probably the most encompassing piece with solutions. At the solutions that I perceived at that time. I've changed since then. And now I'm slaving away at Zeitgeist Requiem, which did have its loose premiere early last year, pathetically enough. But I've had to do a lot of work to perfect this, to really make it what I want it to be, along with some rights and legal things, because it's a very dense documentary with a lot of archival footage and stuff. So that's the capsule summation.
How would you describe Wall Street to somebody who's just trying to understand what it is and how it impacts their everyday life?
I would probably first describe where it came from, which is this simple idea that people get together, they want to start a company in the firm, private enterprise capitalist system. So they invest money. And what do you do when you invest money into something? You want a return. Typically that return would have dividends, as they used to call them. A board would own stock and they get a certain percentage of the profits. But that ended quite rapidly when they realized they could just trade those pieces of paper known as stock amongst themselves and then create this fantasy value, this what's called notional value. And the delusion is so incredible. Like I don't mean to distract from your question, but the idea that the system, for example, creates wealth. So I'd tell them that the system doesn't create anything. Wall Street is a abstracted trading system of nothing. And the money that it goes into it is instantly given to somebody else. So when you look at a stock price, you see this notional value, which I'll just say is fake value. That's essentially what it means, because it's not wealth. It doesn't even exist. It's just the value of that piece of paper. But yet the whole of society has been trained to think, like when you hear these news reports, like with the Trump tariffs, like, oh, Trump wiped out X number of billions of dollars of wealth on the stock market. Actually, no, he didn't. There's nothing there. It doesn't exist. It's just a number. Now, that may be realized at some point if someone wants to buy or sell once again, then it realizes that market value at that particular point in time. But when Elon Musk, for example, when he says he's worth X number of billion, you have to remember that that's not actually what he's worth. Just to reinforce this point, he's worth this notional value in all of his stock holdings. And if he ever did want to liquidate everything he had, it would drop by an enormous percentage by force of the market. But what the average person needs to know is that they've been roped into, for retirement concepts and for this idea of hedging against inflation, they've been roped into the tradition of thinking this is what they're supposed to do, which most people do. And what does that do? It gives liquidity to all the wealthy banks that use that money, or they manipulate around that money in ways that are too complex to even describe. It's just like what they're trying to do with Social Security now in retirement. They want to give it to the bankers so they can put it into Wall Street. They'll put it in an investment fund, But it's just more liquidity for the upper 10%, 5 to 10% that really own the entire market. And they will, in the end, through the fees and through the very shenanigans of how these things move, get the last laugh. They always are going to be able to exploit it for their upper class interests. So it's one big siphoning machine, long story short, for the rich. And I'll say one more thing on that. It's a Ponzi scheme. I mean, that's what I think people fail to really realize. The whole thing is a goddamn Ponzi scheme. And it's just building more greater full theory, greater full energy from people below and below. And it prides itself on this fear and greed notion. And it manipulates people's emotions in that way. It's a very core thing to true professional traders, which again, true professional traders are people that just want to be off the grid from the market. Those are the people that I knew. I don't agree with what they're doing, but they're not trying to abuse anybody, even though abuse is inherent to the system, because ultimately you're exploiting people for their weakness or lack of information or lack of edge in the competitive structure of the market. But they're in there for the game of trying to get that kind of, that abstracted chop off so they can live. They're not the most evil people in the market. The evil people in the market are these giant commercial banks with really frightening AI systems. I don't know if you've ever heard of I can't remember the name of it right now. It's like a micro trading strategy where these houses, these brokerage houses, they can front run all the orders in a fraction of a second. Have you heard of this? This is a very common practice, and it's still legal.
No.
And they shave off fractions of wealth every single time someone places an order. It's a computer system. The order goes this way, and it goes up to whatever the next level of the brokerage exchange, like the New York Stock Exchange. And then there's another little electronic impulse that shoots through it, and then takes a little percentage of it, extracting value from that, or front running, I should say, the actual amount, which means that once it hits, that thing sells, or whatever the algorithmic angle is, and it shaves off a number of cents in some cases. And if you do that millions and billions of times, well, I mean, it's just all criminal. If there's anything I'd argue, it's abolish Wall Street. Main Street capitalism is bad enough. Wall Street is this extra layer of complete and utter psychotic insanity where people don't even care. Like the value system distortion is fantastic too, because people profit off of decline through the short sales. So there's no intrinsic interest in building anything. If you can go and do a currency, a Forex trade, a currency is going to fall, you can compound that fall for some small country, really harming that country if it's strong enough. So it's just a terrible, terrible overlay. So I hope that's what I would say to people.
That's an amazing summary. And by the way, a quick side note, I will humbly mention, I can't wait to hear what you think about my movie when you get a chance to watch it, because it is all about Wall Street. So
nice. I'm into it. There's another project. Again, I have lots of things, but going after Wall Street, going after crypto, going after this entire lunacy of fake nonsense that it serves as the worst metaphor for society, where it doesn't matter what anything does economically. It's just a widget. It's just the rock, it's just nonsense. And that's what our economy is being built on.
Yeah. Well, I actually do. This is in my movie. I mentioned how philosophers have warned against ever doing something like this.
Yeah.
Like you go through like everything from Proudhon to Marx, like they all warned against building capital upon capital upon capital because there's no value in that. And that's literally what Wall Street is.
Yeah.
They warned against ever making a system like this. And at some point people thought, that's a good idea. We're going to do that. And here we are.
I will argue that it is an inevitable neuroses of the system, though. So while I would say abolish Wall Street, if we had any discipline as a civilization and tried to make the market work, in contradiction to that, the market's still about the same principles of exploiting. It doesn't matter what you sell. It just matters if you make profit off of it, right? That's just the way the system motivates people. It's driven in reverse. It's not about creating something to help something. If you can help people, that's a side effect, right? If you can service something, that's a side effect. The core interest is simply the extraction of money from others. Yeah.
So, I want to get into InterReflections then.
Oh, sure.
Because you kind of forecast a more I don't know if utopian's the right word, but kind of a more better way to do society, at least.
InterReflections was a unique experimental piece that really didn't reach the fruition that it needed. It was too difficult. I took on too much. It was a one-man army, 3-hour film of a composite structure. And by the end of it, I was just dead. In fact, it's the kind of trauma of production. If I know you've made films, this was just the worst thing that I had ever done in terms of the workload, thousands of hours. But I ultimately still love that piece as sort of the epic. And if people look at it the right way, they can see the true passion behind it. And if they take the time to actually wrestle with the film, I'll say this. It's very satisfying, but in the world today, most people just want to have that kind of layer of narration and not to think too much about it. They don't want to be challenged. People don't want to see abstraction and things like that. But speaking to your point, after I qualify the nature of that film, because that film has not done remotely as well as my other films, which is kind of a bummer. But at the same time, I shouldn't have expected it to. It's just a work of passion. But in the end of that film, which is really to be the beginning of a sequel, and this will lead into this other project I'm doing called Integral, which will be featured in my new film, which is a grassroots true activist initiative. The people at the end, for those that saw InterReflections, they start an artificial island using advanced technology. It's all fantasy. It's built on that Buckminster Fuller notion of livingness over weaponry. So there's the symbology of the nuclear bomb that drops at the end, but it doesn't destroy anything. It builds something. And what they do in the sequels, if they're ever to materialize, I do have plans to do it, but in a very, very different fashion, is they start to send these packages around the world about how people can live sustainably. A very simple premise. So you can imagine, they're basically this rogue hacktivist group, and they're advancing their technology faster than the evil people on the establishment mainland or whatever. And they start to influence the rest of the world. And there's this transition shift. And people start to utilize certain principles, which is what the technology symbolizes, and to build their own communities and to start to network a completely different system. And that builds through the third film, which shows another level. I'm just going to summarize this. Shows another level of it where people have actually created this. And obviously there's lots of dialogue and things that go along with all this. They've created this new parallel economy that is different. And it's not like some state that just gets cordoned off like Russia tried to do and so forth. It's a different kind of structure. They're all networked together, but they're still kind of self-contained. And my favorite part of it, just to conclude, even though it's a very bad and quick description, is by the end, the terrorists of the world are the Milton Friedman, Ayn Rand, F.A. Hayek people. So these are the people that refuse to accept the sustainable system. So they have their guns and they have all their stupid rhetoric and shit. And they live on this outskirt, and they're literally the outcasts. All the basically normality, even I'm giving an extreme here, but normality itself becomes the outcast. And so the perspective of the final film is that these are the sick culture. The normal culture is our new culture. And look, it gives that kind of sense of hindsight, because that's something that people don't have enough of. I should say that device of hindsight, it's very helpful, where you kind of, as you age, for example, you start to realize in your youth, you do stupid things like, God, I thought really badly back then, and so on. Well, that's the kind of angle I was going for in this. And essentially, you have this final kind of scene in the whole series where the new, I wouldn't call it utopia, of course, that's a pejorative, but the new society is taking root and becoming sustainable, and they're having to tolerate in a very satirical manner all the crazed normals from what is the normality of today. But let me carry that forward, though, because it's not just a fantasy concept. It's literally, it was built on these principles of decentralized, anarchistic development that is really big. In my podcast, I did a big section on this. It's been a slow development in order to get it out there, but it's called Integral, and I'm going to have a white paper for it fairly soon. But if anyone wants to watch my last podcast, Revolution Now, I do a good 30-minute description of what this system can be. And as opposed, once again, to trying to fight power and to take things over or start something, We have to build communities that are scalable and strategically so. As we know, we've had many different attempts to do something counterculture since the mid-19th century. A lot of the early socialist stuff, I use that word in parentheses. I don't really agree with the necessity of that word because it's more of a response to capitalism, right? I mean, you can't have socialism without the existence of capitalism. I think we should have a different sense of category for what we're doing. In this sense, sustainable community development in the mid-19th century, you had these kind of time bank structures come up. You had people, there was a guy that in Philadelphia, did a time bank store, believe it or not. He hated the market. I can't remember his name right now, I apologize, but people can look it up. Very radical. And he allowed people to work through these credit systems, and then they could go and exchange those credits. Common sense in a way, but it was a unique experiment. And then, of course, you have the existing time bank structures that are all around the world. Then you have other sharing networks. You have tool libraries. You have peer-to-peer stuff. There's quite a bit of that out there, quite a bit of this sort of subtle difference in economic structure, usually revolved around community. That has never been embraced in a way that can allow for scalability, where increased complexity can emerge through the lens of what's called system science, or particularly cybernetics, which is a big focus of my new film. For those not familiar, cybernetics just means the ability to control a system without the need for external coercion, where the system is designed to be self-regulating. Again, if you think about anarchist philosophy, it's essentially the same thing, except this is a technical field of study. It's rampant in all of our technology. If you like a home thermostat, for example, it takes in the temperature and then it adjusts the temperature automatically when it gets too low or too high, and it finds homeostasis or equilibrium. As abstract as it may seem, that principle can be applied to social development and has been theorized in many different ways by people like Stafford Beer. There was a unique experiment that was shut down by the overthrow of Salvador Allende in Chile called Project Cybersyn. These are little footnotes. And what I'm getting at here is that I've read so much of this stuff, and I really feel, after all my years of activism, after trying to present ideas, that, well, this is what we could do. This is the theory of things. This is what we should be focusing on. There has to be a way to create a small seed, as it were, of community development that starts off in very simplistic form, but built into that seed, as again, going back to the InterReflections point, is a scalable, what's called recursive substructure, which allows things to spread and to connect, where different communities all around the world can begin to create this parallel economy. And they are, by nature of what the structure is in its intrinsic design, able to connect with all the other seeds throughout the world and to scale out. The more people that come into it, the stronger it becomes. And some may say, well, if you did that, government's just going to come shut you down. But there's a unique precedent with this legally across the world, because it's considered a form of charity. It's considered a form of community, just like a lo-fi community development. And I think if this kind of thing can be structured, I could say much more about it. If enough people can come to do this, it would be the greatest step to create a new system. We have to do something like this. We can't theorize anymore. There has to be something. And I'm not talking about people just growing things on a farm and swapping piano lessons for babysitting. It has a very specific technical kernel seed, once again, that allows for increased complexity. So I'm working with some programmers right now. When I release my film, there will also be a book. That's one of the reasons the film was delayed. I have to get all these materials together. I just don't want to put the film out and have people watch it and say, oh, what do I do now? I want to have them go somewhere, kind of like what I did with the Zeitgeist movement many years ago, which I didn't mention earlier. The Zeitgeist movement, of course, is a big movement for a long time. It's faded away now, but it had a lot of potential, but it was also just an educational movement. And I learned from that. I was like, no, education's not going to do this. Obviously it's a part of it, but it's not going to be what solves things. There has to be an active community building process that by nature of it counters the system we have while also fulfilling the actual needs of a true community. And if you do that, you're going to start to suck all the energy out of the market economy, the capitalist system. And I really believe that. I think that's really the only way we can get out of this nightmare before essentially the environmental crisis, which will trigger the authoritarian crisis that's rising now, accelerates to our demise.
So you think that humanity can move past capitalism?
I think we're going to have a big hurdle. I think if enough people can engage a new system. The problem, Ron, is the sickness of these companies and the ethic and the sociopathic nature of leadership is it ensures that there's no real force that the society can put forward. I'd say it's very low probability. Like we have Extinction Rebellion, we have a bunch of rednecks storm the Capitol for Donald Trump. We don't have anybody doing anything of a nature to really aggressively move towards environmental sustainability. The peace movement and the sustainability movement is at a disadvantage because they don't want violence. And unfortunately, the other people kind of do. It's one of the recognitions of like Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X. And I don't advocate violence. I'm just telling you what the probabilities are, that there's very low odds. I mean, right now in the U.S. administration, they're dismantling the entire environmental EPA structure in favor of energy production and so forth. They're all the regulatory apparatus, which is, by the way, the only thing that keeps sanity on the planet. The United States is the canary in the coal mine. Other countries are going to do this, especially when they start losing economic growth. So the damage is already on pace. That's one thing you learn from feedback processes. When we start to see the problem emerge, like we're seeing now with all the environmental problems, that means it's already partially too late, because the solution to stop that was so far in the past. And we're talking decades. So the next few decades, even if we changed everything now, we're going to be very, very rough, particularly from an environmental standpoint. But beyond that, you just deal with it. And you say, well, if we can't stop these companies, if there can't be a global strike, if there can't be, which people should do all that shit. I mean, people should, if there's a way to really galvanize people to stop the machine in its tracks, do it. And I'll always support that. But at the same time, you have to have something to build beyond that. And without that solution in the wings, it doesn't even matter in a way if you stop it. Because if you're just going to appeal to government to pass more legislation and not address the system flaw, then we're just going to cycle back into that territory once again as a natural gravitation. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And I think another thing to your point, applying it to what's going on right now, I think a lot of people lose sight of, you can replace something bad with something worse, which is what we're seeing right now. I mean, you're talking about all these agencies, which, by the way, these agencies are not great. The EPA is, the equivalent of throwing a twig in front of a train track. But now it's even worse, like same with all the other things. So it's
Absolutely.
It's quite a time. I will switch gears for a little bit here.
Sure.
Because before we completely get off of InterReflections, I do have to ask you a kind of mechanical filmmaking question that you kind of touched upon, but I wanted to dive in a little bit more. So that movie, like you said, it is 3 hours. There are, I'm not going to spoil anything. I mean, I have seen it, but there's music interludes. There is like different vignettes and sketches and some very high tech effects. And 3 hours. I mean, hey, I made my first feature not too long ago. It was an hour. I still feel like I climbed multiple mountains. So, I mean, how did you even begin piecing that together in the editing room? And was it just you?
See, the thing is, it's not, the editing was the easy part, because it was all very much storyboarded and you do pre-visualization, and then you had the production, which was way beyond in my prior experience. When I was on in New York, I did shoots and stuff and green screen shoots, because that film InterReflections was, I mean, today it's changed a lot. I don't even know if green screen is needed anymore. I kind of wish maybe I'd waited a few years to make that film. But if anyone that's worked with green screen, it's a very tricky and sensitive environment. And when you're rushing through a rental, in an expensive Los Angeles studio, very hard to have the checks and balances required that, of course, big Hollywood can do. Well, I'll put it this way, Ron. I sat and composited that thing for so many hours. I had lesions straight down my arms from all of just the armrests from trying to knock that thing out. And my poor friends and family are just like I'm just gone. I'm just disappeared into my studio. But yet, the vast majority of all of that, of course, was done by me. I did a lot of the music. I directed all of it, of course. The only thing that I was outsourced, but I still had to composite, was a great deal of the 3D, because the 3D stuff, that was just not my skill set. So there were some contractors that absolutely helped out with that. So that big scene at the end, that was a very expensive scene. I got a budget on that. I got a deal on that. I had to really finagle. Some of those scenes would have cost, $100,000 to do, but I was able to finagle some younger artists to do it that kind of believed in the project. But believe me, I will never do anything like that to myself again. If I ever do any kind of composite work, I will do it in a very, very different way, which we could always talk about later as filmmakers. I have ideas about that when I try to make the sequels as passion projects. But yeah, it was way more than I really should have taken on at that time, which is why it also took many, many years to get done.
Did you shoot it too? Were you the DP?
Oh, I did everything.
Oh,
I did
okay. All right.
I did literally everything. I shot it. I mean, in fact, that was the cartoonish thing, is as the budget was so low, I had to multitask in a way that I don't even know how I did it, to be honest with you. Going to these massive studio shoots, makeup artists, just finagling. I had one assistant, and she's just wonderful, good friend of mine, and she really saved me multiple times. But yeah, it was really just like a 4-man crew with myself that did all the production, all the on-set production. Yeah,
that's incredible, man. I mean, when I saw it, I was just, huh?
I appreciate that. I appreciate that because when people watch it, they're like, "Oh, this doesn't look as good as some Hollywood film." Like, you have no idea what went into this goddamn movie. You know what I mean? Like, people don't see it. In fact, I should make I've intended to make a kind of make a descriptive director's commentary on the movie. I started it, but it's so long. And I just was like, oh, God, there's so much I could say. I just never got around to it. I still want to. I think I should, because I think it would change people's sensibility of what really went into this production and the meaning of it, because I found that so many people, they missed so much of it when they come back and talk about it. I was like, how did you not see what I was doing here and what the symbology here was? There's so much subtlety, especially the dialogue between the two main characters in space, which is the most important dialogue. There's a lot of wonderful, like, I still go back to that as a great success. Like, I might actually reduce that, believe it or not, into a short. And I've talked to the actors about that.
Oh, right on.
It's because that's called The Great Debate as the third layer of the movie. Considering, it could make a nice 30-minute short out of that. I'm still, after I finish this film, I might return to that.
Well, and it was kind of interwoven. I mean, apologies, it is a bit foggy because I saw it at the premiere some years ago, but it kind of was interwoven throughout too. Like, different things would happen, and then they would go back to that conversation.
Yeah, there's 3 timelines. You have the psychedelic, trippy timeline with the woman in the modern day. That's the horror movie timeline. That's because it's normality. And then you have the space timeline, which is the mid-tier, and they're in space, and it's all the conversations about social oppression and economy. And then you have the third tier, which is the future, and people have already transitioned into the new environment, and they're reflecting in hindsight, once again, on what happened in the past and how things improved. It's the academics of the future, the fake documentary, which is that's what's called InterReflections, is the documentary of the absolute future. And so, yeah.
Can I ask what editing program you used?
I think I used Premiere Pro for most of that, but there's a lot of other supplemental programs. But yeah, Premiere Pro. It's mostly an Adobe shop over here. But yeah.
So one more film-related question. So what do you think is kind of the future of the film industry? I mean, especially with, things kind of, I guess, destabilizing, to put it gently, here in Los Angeles, and things just kind of changing around the world.
Oh, it's going to be cataclysmic. I'm glad I waited a little while for the final development of my current film, Zeitgeist Requiem, because the AI tools are beginning to replace things like searching for B-roll endlessly or archival stuff. The ability to generate photorealistic stuff or stylized stuff is going to make its way into the general acting sphere, and people are not going to be the wiser. It will be, I don't know, I guess I could go, Charlie Brooker, Black Mirror on the whole thing and say that, yeah, it is theoretically possible where you could say, take a show like The Sopranos and feed all the scripts into an AI, pop out a new script, and then in time, you're going to be able to reproduce a whole new season with all the original actors of The Sopranos essentially through a computer. I do believe that will happen. In fact, it already kind of has. It's just in fragments. So it's like anything with technology and why we have to get out of the market system. Years ago, I'd say, we got to get out because, menial labor, factory jobs, McDonald's, people are just going to be automated. I thought that was the course. I was wrong. I had no idea this exceptional creative thing would come out of nowhere and just shatter what we thought was the preciousness of at least our contemporary pop culture media stuff. I I wouldn't relegate AI to sensitive poetry or something, but it can still do these things in certain ways. And that is a spooky power in general. But when it comes to film, I think it's just a matter of time before the unions start to have to renegotiate and break down, and ultimately the ultimate breakdown of the system in its totality. There will be a time where this system cannot hold up. And as we saw during like the Keynesian era, or even before that, there was a guy that wrote a book called The Paradise Within the Reach of All Men in 1855. This guy, who unfortunately, name leaves me a little tired today, but anyone can look up this book, The Paradise Within the Reach of All Men. And he prophesized that automation was going to remove human labor in time. This is way before like a John Maynard Keynes, and he wrote that essay you might remember or heard about called For Our Grandchildren. He's like, well, by the time the mid-20th century, people will only work 5 days a week, and it will have a near utopia, et cetera, and so forth. The guy in 1855 said the same thing, and you start to see these trends. You're like, okay, why has nothing settled? Because if the standard of living went back to 1855, yeah, by the technology we have today, everyone could live in a completely upper class, generally not like a king, but a really high-end lifestyle for that period of time if we utilize technology. So what are we doing? And this takes me to a different subject. We've created, of course, this growth ethic that's built into the economy. The entire economy needs growth constantly, but we've perverted the entire culture. And it's not just through advertising, it's through all this other emotional manipulation in this hedonistic development, a hedonistic sensibility, which is replete throughout everything we see. It's the driving force, of course, of consumption. So that's one thing I touch upon in my new film, is that in concert with this idea of integral I mentioned, we have to start consciously developing a more conservative, minimalistic sense of existence. Like, it's common sense. You live on a finite planet. And not to mention, it's better for your mental health, as all psychiatrists or psychologists will tell you. The more you want, the more you're going to want. So we have this sickness of just driving for more and more. And going back to the technological unemployment question, we're just going to keep sabotaging and creating new nonsense for us to be occupied with. So I don't know what that is, but we really should have reduced the work week. And why haven't we done that? One time in the mid-20th century, we got to 40 hours a week. Why? Because there probably would have been a revolution. Well, maybe it's time for another revolution again to get that work week back down. I know Sanders did introduce something like that, of course, poetically. I don't think he ever expected it to happen, I think about 2 years ago. But it is an important conversation. So the film industry is just going to be gyrated like every other industry by greedy top tier CEOs. And they're going to incorporate this stuff, and they're going to kick everybody out very, very slowly. It will happen.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's brutal. I mean, it's a shame because, I think that a lot of these tools, well, not all of them, but some of them at least, could be used to just, make processes easier and quicker, and could just accompany humans instead of completely replacing them. But there's always people are just always looking to exploit.
Absolutely. It's all cost efficiency. That's the phrase. If you're in a business, if you're a privatized market company, you're looking to lower input costs. And if you don't do that, you lose your competitive edge, which means somebody else that is a little bit more shrewd will lower their costs, their cost inputs, and then you're going to lose market share because everyone's going to buy the cheaper thing. So it's a self-generating nightmare of constant screwing over and digging a giant hole. Ultimately, when you look at what the future holds in terms of technological efficiency, I'll just say though, as you said, kind of the implication of what you just said is that maybe we shouldn't use it for these purposes. But I'd say that if you remove this incentive of the market, then it would take care of itself. Why shouldn't we appreciate the ability of AI to generate unique media? I mean, there's nothing really wrong with any of it. I don't mind computers making music. I don't care about any of it. It's all just creativity. It's just the fact that everyone has to have labor for income. And then it gets perverted in culture. People are like, what was I don't know, people get this obsession, this egotism, like, oh, I don't want to be replaced by a machine. I'm human. I'm special. Just like the guys thought a machine could never beat a guy in chess, because the Russian grandmaster, if you remember, said it was a deep emotional, spiritual process that only a human could do to really win at chess. Well, no, it's not. He was quickly destroyed by the blue machine, I think it was called. You see my point, though? There's a neuroses in parallel with the problem of the market's need for labor, for income. So anyway.
Well, so going beyond film then and just kind of big picture, what do you think is ahead for the contemporary United States?
The trajectory seems pretty clear. We've destroyed, well, the administration, the executive branch, with just the zero reaction from the rest of the branches and any kind of counter, balancing. They're just destroying all regulatory apparatus, and that will have a long-term systemic effect. There will be a short-term economic growth, regardless. Well, and again, the executive branch is like it's like an 8-year-old child, so you don't really know. The chaos is so severe that you don't quite know, but the playbook. For example, what do they do with Social Security if they want to destroy it because they don't want anything that's outside of the system that's socialistic? So they defund the whole thing. And what does that do? It gets people frustrated with it. And then they start to develop this idea, just like has been common propaganda for a long time, that everything the government does, which is really an extension of democracy, if you think about it, everything the government does is inefficient. And we just have to move everything to privatization. So they build the ecosystem, they shut it down. Again, as I said earlier, the only thing that keeps the market capitalism with any level of stability is perpetual regulatory intervention. Like, that's what people don't understand. The system does not self-regulate at all. And that's what's being disassembled, aside from all the authoritarian stuff. That's another overlay, which is also expected in a late capitalist concept. You have a lot of forces out there that want to see things change, especially in the environmental realm. And so what do you do with that? You devise ways to just block it. And same with all the crises around the world, from Gaza to the global south. All the people in Gaza is a separate problem, but it's also in the mix, of course. But all of the poor people that are going to be really brutalized by the environmental decline, which already are, as shit dries out and floods, they're all going to rush, just like they did for Rome, but even a different ecosystem. They're all going to rush towards the empire. They're all going to rush towards the North and the West. They're going to rush towards the United States and Europe. And you're going to get to a point where these leaders are going to say, well, these outsiders, as they already are saying, these outsiders are the problem, the woes of the world. It's not about anything that we're doing. And that's where it's going to get really nasty. And the authoritarianism is not only going to present itself more strongly, just like in Nazi Germany, it's going to present itself with more support of the general population, because they're not going to be educated enough to know anything better. And that is very much in its momentum, as we see right now, with all of the general rhetoric of the Trump administration and beyond. It's not just Trump. There's a large move towards an authoritarian right in multiple pockets, and I think it's going to accelerate. Just as we spoke earlier before the show, something's happening to the consciousness of a lot of people that used to have a progressive sense of humanity, and they're just getting more cold and more rigid, and they're even a little more responsive, I think, to a hardline position. And that's a bad ecosystem to create, as we've seen from history time and time again. Nazi Germany couldn't have done what it did without a general support from the people of Germany at that time, brought into that ruse that was put forward by the Third Reich.
Do you have hope? And if so, where do you draw that from?
These trajectories are just what they are. I see them in an objective sense, meaning hope is a good word in the sense to say that, yes, we have the potential for change. And I agree with that. Sorry, I didn't mean to deviate that to an emotional point, but when I hear the word hope, it triggers something different in my mind.
No, I understand.
But yes, as I said earlier, there is a path, and I think we can change rapidly. Humans are extremely adaptable in the right environment. And that's why this project, promoting minimalism, promoting a new economic parallel society, ways people can start to create community, not just locally, which is a big part of it, but also locally in the sense of a global community, because they start to network. I learned this from the Zeitgeist movement. At one point, we had about 800 chapters in virtually every country at the peak of the movement. There was this amazing moment where everyone kind of got together, and from people from Russia, people from Argentina, It was just fascinating. And of course, when you're dealing with an educational movement, as I said earlier, it fizzles quite quickly because it just breeds infighting. And social movements are hard in that way.
Yeah.
But we can still develop a global consciousness with a local sensibility in harmony with nature and revising these values that don't serve us in terms of, colonial abuse, exploitation. We just need to have that environment available to us. If we can create the environment, no matter how small, I do have hope that most people's core sensibilities will change and they will develop a deeper sense of compassion and empathy. It's just right now that's all being deeply blocked by the structure and the forces that we're seeing. But I will add to that, as I said earlier, there will be a very dramatic set of problems on the horizon before it eases back out, though. Whether it's a much larger expansion of war or really cataclysmic environmental things, because that's moving much more rapidly than anyone thought. Not just pollution for climate destabilization. It's a litany of other things. You got water problems. You have huge biodiversity problems. You have all these massive ocean problems that no one talks about enough, and the imbalance that's being created. Food resources. It's going to hit a very rough patch probably before anything smooths out. So.
Where can people go to learn more about you? Plug away.
I have a litany of film websites. peterjoseph.info is my badly updated personal site. Everything can basically be found from there. So peterjoseph.info.
Peter, thanks so much for doing this.
Hey, man, always a pleasure, Ron. Let's do this more often. It's good to see you.
That was Peter Joseph. By the way, I will humbly mention, and I hope he doesn't mind, but Peter watched Left It Wall, and he told me he enjoyed it. So I was really, really happy to hear that. And by the way, I also don't know if you guys could tell, but I am getting over being sick. I was sick a fair amount last week. So I guess that's another thing here at 1000. As we go through this journey, we'll be able to document health hiccups along the way. This is the first time that I have been sick, truly sick. I mean, I probably had like a runny nose or something at some point, but noteworthy sick since the start of 1000. So I guess that's not bad. 90 weeks. That's a pretty good run. Anyway, music for the 1000 podcast is provided by Andrew Saxon. Be sure to check out his podcast, the Baywatching Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review, would you? And if you want to support this show on the sustainability end, patreon.com/Ron Placone. For a Get What You Can level, you get all kinds of cool stuff. We have a Zoom hangout once a month that just happened. It's an amazing time. And I also drop full stand-up clips not available anywhere else, insider videos on new projects and films, et cetera, et cetera. And that's all for a Get What You Can level. We got a wonderful community over on Patreon. All right, 90. It is now 1990. Ron is starting to play youth soccer. And I'll be honest, he's not very good. He's not very good. As the years go by, he gets a little better. I wasn't a bad soccer player. Wasn't a great soccer player. Anyway, I don't know if you can tell in my voice, but hopefully I just sound normal. We'll catch you next week. Peace. Hey guys, Ron Placone here. Take your own 1000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1000 challenge can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1000 is doing for me and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.